Screenless. The TV drama is imagined. The work and the guests are real. Making a soundtrack. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Gareth.
Opening scene and action!
How are you?
I'm well. I'm all right. Fighting the good fight. How are you?
Yep, I'm all right.
Enough of that.
Yep.
Today we are heading to insert liminal zone jingle here.
You've just entered the liminal zone.
Yeah, track 6.
Yeah, track 6. We're getting on in the album now, aren't we?
Yep. This is the 5th one because we've still got track 2, which is the titles
Theme tune.
to nail. But I think we'll probably end up getting the rest of the album done first and go back to that one.
Yeah. We're really sculpting the sound now. It's beginning to sound like an album.
Yeah, I think there's a definite palette there that we're using and drawing from and augmenting and all that kind of good stuff.
So that will be coming up. And who is our guest today?
Well, our guest today is the post-audio superstar, Lucy Mitchell.
Yes. She is experienced in all sorts from dialogue editing, sound effects and Foley editing, ADR and voiceover recording, and full post-mixing in some cases.
Yeah.
And so I went down to her brand spanking new studio to have a little look and to spend some time chatting with her, and we Skyped you in.
You did indeed, yeah.
Yeah, it was quite nice. So if you go to the social medias, you will see a picture of us all with Dan on the screen there.
Looking very goofy.
With his smiling little face.
My smiling little face. Look at his little face.
Look at his little face. How happy is he? How patronising. Great. So, that's coming up. So shall we cue the music?
Cue.
Go on, get up there, son.
Cue the music!
Yay!
Cue the music.
We discussed our approach to track 6 on the last episode. This is going to be led by you.
Yep.
Basically, we talked about a combination of character 1 and 2 themes and clashing and building and all that.
We did. We also alluded mildly to a track that was written for character 2 that we then decided wasn't right.
Yes, elements of that we thought sounded really good and we could easily use elsewhere. A little while ago, 10 minutes ago, I received a text message from you saying, drawn a blank on the spare track, i.e. using the elements from.
That's right.
However, importing track 4 and 5 into the same session has resulted in some interesting moments.
Yes. Well, I thought, considering what had been how those two were created, i.e. I created track 4 and then you reversed it and manipulated it and added parts to make track 5, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I imported both of those tracks into the same session side by side and just played it to see what would happen? And there's quite a lot of clashing and stuff, but because you've got a major and relative minor, there's a lot of moments where actually stuff happens, and there was a couple of points where the melodies kind of take over from each other, which is really interesting. And there's a couple of really nice exchanges where like I say, the melody, you'll have character 1's stuff going on, but underneath you can still hear there's little bits of character 2, and then they'll swap over and stuff. It's really interesting.
So is it a case of taking the individual instrument tracks and chopping those up and placing? So a bit like a jigsaw.
Yeah, we obviously need to, and as we discussed before, it needs to be a build. So there needs to be an underlying pulse to the whole thing, and it needs to sort of build up a little bit. But it is definitely taking, I think, putting some markers in the session. Now, I think if we were to do this, I'm just concerned about tempo, because those two are in the same tempo. and we would then have a third track that would also be in the same tempo. So I didn't know whether to start it off at the same tempo and speed it up, or whether to just from the off start it at a different tempo, whether that be quicker or slower.
Yeah, it's a tricky question. Would keeping it at the same tempo not really move it on?
That's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering whether it's just gonna, I don't know. You can stay at one tempo and it'd be fine. I mean, maybe it's just because we're used to doing to picture where the tempo jumps up and down so often, just so that you can get your hit points in, that we're kind of worrying about tempo, when actually it doesn't matter because this hasn't got a picture.
Yes, very true. It's more, I'm thinking more of the building the suspense, building the event.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, because this is why I've raised the question, because I'm not entirely sure, but I also think you can do that with the arrangement as well.
I was actually going to come on to that in terms of, if you're going to keep the tempo the same, something's got to change. So you can't just repeat the previous two tracks. It might be that we build melodies or develop the character themes for each instrument around what you've got there.
If I start with a carbon copy of track 4 as the basis, I don't want to start, because that just starts straight away on the old ivories. I don't want to start like that. I think it's got to lead into it. So I might take a note from some of the other tracks we've done and have almost like an intro bit. A bit like track 5 seems to have that feels like it's got a little intro before it gets going. So definitely have an easy way into it. But then I think I will introduce character 1 first and then character 2. And as we discussed in the last one, with them being just sort of circling around each other. I think now talking about it, I think I'll keep the tempo the same for now.
Yeah, okay.
Because I mean, you've not heard this yet.
No.
So there are a couple of points that are really, really nice. And there's a couple of hits and things that I think would be really cool and I could elaborate on a bit more. So I think it's just going to be a little bit of experimentation just to see how I can get everything to sit together.
And it might be that, being kind of a Dr. Frankenstein and chopping bits up and putting it together, with the view to re-recording those bits.
Yeah.
And making them talk to each other better.
Well, obviously I've got the whole session because I led track 4, character 1. So I've got the whole session of that. So that should be really easy to chop and change and mess about with. And then I've got the stems for character 5. So as soon as I've identified which bits I want, then I can just import the stems and chop away.
Yeah, that's exciting. When we talked about taking a character theme and then mirror imaging the other character theme and then having those clash together, I did not anticipate that we would do that so literally. I mean, we are literally taking the sounds from this and the sound from that and crashing them together. And I would never have in a million years, I probably would never have done that myself, actually. So it's another kind of collaboration tick that we've kind of come to this conclusion. Just fantastic.
Yeah, I just think it's bouncing ideas off each other. And there's a lot to be said for that, having someone that you can trust, that you can just say, well, do you know what? This is an idea. And it could be the craziest, wackiest idea ever. And they could laugh at you. But it doesn't matter because you've got that person, or they might just suddenly go, do you know what, that's a really good idea, try it.
Yeah, I don't think there are any bad ideas when it comes to a blank slate.
No,
it just depends on where it goes and how it's the context, isn't it? And this, I think, is an idea worth exploring, not having heard it yet. But I'm going to.
No, you should probably have a listen. It might all, I could spend a day on it and think, actually, do you know what, this is rubbish. I'll just write something from scratch and bring the themes in. But it's all part of the process.
Well, definitely, I think, go and explore. I'll have a listen, and if I can offer anything else, then I will. But I think this is where we have that little ding to signify the passage of time.
So,
you've been busy.
I've been busy, yes. I did take the 2 tracks and have a go at finding what I thought was good, what was interesting between the 2 of them. So I have done it. I have a couple of things that I would like to do, and there are a couple of things that I haven't got round to doing yet, which I will discuss with you, but I don't want to say too much. I would just like you to listen to it and see what you think.
This is great. How very exciting. Okay, here we go.
So,
God, where do I start? Wow.
so there are certain things that I would like to do. For example, the pads at the end
Yeah.
just happened to be there because I moved them out of the way. So it was actually supposed to, with that sort of bizarre riser thing at the end, it was supposed to sort of end there.
Yeah.
However, what I would quite like to do is put maybe 8 bars of those pads, which are just the pads from track 4, but down an octave. When the drums stop, before we get the build up, I might just put those pads in there because that associates. I don't think it's quite strong enough for character 1 yet.
I agree. Yeah, the character 2 theme it had echoes of character 2 theme, and that was very recognisable.
Yeah, and the character 1 theme, I took elements of it. They're not at this point. They're not mixed particularly high either. There are elements of it throughout, but I want to bring a bit more of that in there. The other thing is that I think it could probably do with some strings. I did attempt to put some character 2 strings in there. I did something where I stuck one of the themes from character 2 through a ring modulator and put it in there, and thought it was really cool, but then there was just too much character 2 stuff and we need more character 1. Yeah. So that's something so structural wise, I'd like to just shift that. I was a little concerned that because I took track 5 as sort of the basis and then started messing about, I was slightly concerned that it was structurally too much like track 5.
It was my first impression was, are we just starting track 5 again? It might be that instead of starting right from the start of that, maybe go 10 seconds in or something, so it at least feels like it's moved on.
Yeah, I'll move the chords to the middle bit after the drums stop so that we get more character 1. I'm also wanted to make the start a little bit more character 1.
Right, okay.
The way that I approached it was that character 1 is somewhere and character 2 is heading there, and then there's this confrontation between the two of them. Hence why character 2 was all sort of echoey and in the background a bit.
What we need to be wary of is that we're not just recycling and kind of moving it on like that, but we actually need to, because this is a clash of sorts, it has to create a new thing, doesn't it? There needs to be some kind of...
Yeah.
I think it needs to evolve as well as recycle. So something new needs to be sprouting out of these two things.
If I have a mess around with the notes thus far then...
Yeah.
And have a look at, I'm going to have a look at changing the structure slightly and trying to make character 1 a bit more defined, a bit more identifiable in there, and maybe make the drums last a bit longer, because I have kind of shoved character 1 in amongst that, but I could just move the character 1 bit and extend the drums so that there's a bit more space.
So I had a go at the strings.
Yeah.
I added a melody line that sort of chased the other strings that you did.
Yeah.
You popped that in.
That really sort of added to the tension. You know, it helped you feel a bit more on edge.
Yeah, we were keen to emphasise the counterpoint of these two characters.
Yeah.
And what you did then was to extend the final section of the track.
This is something that you will get to know and love, I hope, about me, is that I can never end a track. I don't know whether this comes from many, many moons ago being in a prog band where every track had to be 59 minutes long, but I just can't seem to stop a track. So I'll just get a little spark of an idea and then that'll be off. I'm off on one. So yes, I did a Dan and added some extra bits to the end.
To be honest, when I heard it, it just seemed like your brain had just carried on into the next track.
Yeah.
So it made perfect sense, but it didn't make sense to end the track with a very long kind of aftermath sound after the riser that you'd done at the end.
Yeah. So having added all the extra synths and other such sound effects stuff to really sort of build that up, I could then hear the next bit, and you're absolutely right. I think my brain was just going, I know where we're going now. I know where we're going. And so just kept on going. So we put that on the end. That was version 1.3. The other thing we discussed was that middle section then, where we'd had those drums, all of a sudden just didn't seem to make sense. You know, we'd gone from, that bit's not long enough, make it longer, to making it longer, and then having this bit, another sort of rise at the end. And then this bit came in, and as much as I loved it, I really loved when character 2 came in, bang on beat 1 of bar 1 with the drums. It just felt really powerful, but it just didn't really do anything and just kind of plodded along.
Yeah, it seemed a bit like a continuation of the character theme rather than what we're trying to achieve here, which is the combat, the tension, and the change. You know, this is the liminal zone. I won't do the voice. Rather than having those drums, we talked about maybe having the whole thing rise. So going right back to a very sparse sound and adding in the frenetic, having lots of mangled things coming in and coming out and delays, and all the way through having these character 1 and 2 themes a little bit at each other.
Yeah.
Question and answer, circling each other.
Yeah, so
yeah.
So what I did was I removed the drums, but that was not before I'd passed them through several different guitar pedals and things just to
Of course,
yeah. Just to get different kind of textures and things in there. And so there was a couple of delays that have got freeze functions on where I'd hold the button and then I'd move the time of the delay so that it gave sort of slightly off and jarring kind of textures to it. And then there was a pitch shift pedal which has got a feedback on it, and if you just get it right, it starts sort of like howling like some sort of weird banshee. So I used that, and that became this as a really nasty noise at the end of it, and that was all from that. So that kind of worked, removing the drums and having those sort of fade in and build up. I added a couple of extra synths and other such things because you can never have too many synths on a track.
Shall we have a little listen to how that changed?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. think now we have the right structure, the right sound. It's we're getting into the finer points, aren't we?
Yeah.
The really the minutiae of it. Part of that was keeping that low bass. The low bass that was before that section suddenly disappeared.
Yeah, through the build-up, it actually stops through the build-up. There's a different bass thing that comes in, but there's an arpeggio before, and I just brought the arpeggio back. It's just, it's not actually an arpeggio, it's an arpeggiator. It's just actually playing one note. It's just playing the root note, but I put that in underneath, and that cured that whole issue. The next thing was the character themes. Still just sounding a little too polite, as if, something awful's going on, but they're just having a cup of tea together rather than possibly at each other's throats. So, yeah, that was the next thing to have a go at. So I put character 1 through Space Echo, and then I haven't done anything for character 2 yet, so I still need to do that.
From around the 2-minute mark, it just struck me that was the point where everything changes, and being in the liminal zone, as in, this is the event that changes everything.
Yeah.
It seems like both characters need to have changed. So if there's a way that you can change character 2 theme as well.
If I was to have it doubled, maybe an octave below and mildly distorted. Okay. Something like that, although sometimes...
Who doesn't like a bit of mild distortion?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes when you pitch stuff down like that, if the mix is already quite busy, it just gets lost, and it's really difficult to get it to sit nicely. So maybe... you
could always try above.
I could try above. I could also try... there's Soundtoys Crystallizer is great. You can do sort of... pitch shift stuff, but it's also a delay as well, so you can reverse it. Ooh. So that's an interesting thought. The other one I thought about was sticking it through some sort of auto-tune thing, but really forcing the notes into a small scale so that it really latches onto them and is really quite aggressive. That can be interesting sometimes. Sometimes actually just making something slightly different. So having the original there, but bussing it to a separate channel and really EQing that channel so that it's almost an obvious example of this is the sort of telephone effect. So if you put something like that in and then balance the two, I've got a great old spring reverb that distorts nicely, pass things through that. In fact, piano sounds great through that, so that's something else I might try as well.
We haven't done a single nerd alert for this section.
Oh dear. Have
we not? Maybe we have.
I don't know.
I just don't know anymore, man.
Too many nerd alerts.
To be fair, this is probably the most we've spent on a track, most time we've spent on a track so far, most involved we've been.
Yeah, definitely.
In really thinking about getting it right. Because I suppose before it's been, let's just establish the sound, so that could be anything.
Yeah.
But now we've got to really look back and go, well, does that relate to that? Does that relate to that? And if not, how can we change it so it does?
Exactly.
And also looking forwards to, changing this sound to something. The events happen, so how does it sound afterwards?
Yeah.
Kind of looking backwards and forwards at the same time. So confusing.
Yeah, but I think we're there.
Yeah. It's definitely been worth the kind of backwards and forwards and spending the time thinking about it.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun actually.
Okay, so you're going to go muck about with your piano theme 2, character theme 2.
Yep.
Okay.
I think that's the last thing to do.
I think so. And then maybe we can have a little listen through to a lot of it.
Yeah, there'd be quite a lot of it to listen to, yes.
Yeah. We'll certainly give a good chunk.
Cool.
Okay, to your elephants.
Laters.
Well, that's like Toots Super Amazeballs. I think you've achieved that change in
timbre and tone.
Timbre. Yeah.
Cool. So,
very good.
Track 7 then.
Track 7. Straight on. Hang on, before we do that, let's have a little listen. Okay.
Track 7. Track 7. Come on.
Broadcast Hotshot 2013, WFTV Mentee 2015 and BAFTA crew member, Lucy is experienced in dialogue, sound effects and Foley editing, ADR and voiceover recording and full post-mixing. Her credits include BBC's Top Gear and EastEnders, Amazon Prime's The Collection and National Geographic's David Attenborough's Rise of the Animals. Lucy Mitchell, welcome to Making a Soundtrack podcast.
Hi, thank you.
So, Lucy, how did you get into the industry and why post-production?
When I was younger, I guess a lot of people who do my job say that they were musicians. Most sound engineers that I've met were musicians at some point, but usually have gone into it because they used to, mix and record their bands or something, which I didn't necessarily do. My dad is in outside broadcasting, which is, when they go and film sport, usually he'll sort of take a truck full of cameras and everything. And he used to do the Brits and things like that. And so I've always sort of had an interest in TV, but not really known which area. I didn't know about post-production. I didn't know all the areas. And I kind of, I used to kind of do work experience with the cameramen and hold cables behind them and thought maybe I want to be a cameraman and all that. And decided I didn't want to do that when they asked me to do cricket. And I was like, I think I'm more interested in the Brits than being a cameraman. But because of the skills that I had, I was very good at maths and I was very good at music. I was kind of thinking, well, maybe going into some sort of sound area. I didn't want to be a music composer like you guys, because I wasn't very good at composing, to be fair. I didn't want to be a performer because I just wasn't good enough, and I was insecure and get nervous and all that sort of stuff. And I just didn't know. I didn't want to be a music producer, and I didn't want to not love my music, and I was just really torn and didn't know what to do. And then when I was, I guess, 16, going into A-levels, we have to do work experiences through school, just in the summer, I think it is, after exams. And they were going to put me in something really boring, I can't remember what it was, a library or something. And my dad was like, that's ridiculous. I'll sort something out for you in the TV industry. I was like, cool. So I did work experience in a post-production company called Blue, like ages ago. It's where on Old Compton Street. And I went into the different areas. I went into visual effects and went into production and went into offline and tape ops and stuff. And then when I went into the sound studios, I just found it much more interesting, and sort of said, well, can I just sit here for the rest of the week? This is much more fun. And the guy was making, a guy called Rich Martin, who I then worked with at Envy, which is really bizarre. He was making the hold music for the phones at Blue, which I thought was really cool. And then he had to do voiceovers and he did lots of sound design for commercials. And I just found it fascinating. And because there were so many different areas to his job, I felt like that wouldn't be boring. And because I was helping him come up with ideas and stuff, and I felt like with my musical ear, potentially it could be a good thing to do. However, I wasn't 100% sure when I went to uni that I wanted to do that, so I didn't go and do a sound engineering degree or whatever, because, if you do such a vocational degree and then you don't do it, it's quite hard, transferable skills-wise with a sound engineering degree. It's quite, obviously you have a good techie brain or whatever, but it's quite hard to then go for a normal job, I imagine. I don't know, I've never tried. So I didn't do it at uni, but I did music where they had a sound engineering module. But my dad was sort of saying, if you want to go into the industry, degrees are all well and good, but if you don't have work experience, you won't get looked at for any job. So he was pushing and pushing and pushing for every single summer holidays. Every time I had when I wasn't working or at uni, he was like, you need to go and do work experience. And I was lucky that he had a few contacts, but most of the time it was just sort of me emailing people saying, hi, can I come and just watch you work for a bit? Obviously paraphrasing, but just kind of trying to get some work experience, because none of my friends did it. No one I knew did it. Like I said, luckily Dad knew some people, so I kind of got the idea there. And then, when I left uni, I sort of had decided, this is what I want to do, and applied for a couple of jobs on like production base, I think it was, and Music Jobs UK. Yeah. I think that's now called Music UK Jobs. I don't know, they changed the name of it.
Yeah, something like that.
Had a few interviews, and I got a trial day at Envy, and at the end of the day they sort of kind of had a little interview thing and said and I started as a runner there, making tea for people 8 hours a day. And then from there, they were full post-production, so did pictures and everything, but obviously I knew I wanted to do sound, so I was mostly in my lunch breaks and after work sort of training in the machine room. At that time it was still tapeless. It was before tapeless, so we were like tape ops and doing duplication and getting all the DATs and D88s and all that sort of stuff, and laying back to tape and all the kind of things that I don't really do anymore. So I was, training in the studios, trying to learn everything, because obviously most people in the kitchen with me had a degree and had done surround mixes at uni and all this, and I was like, I don't know what 5.1 means, I don't know what a WAV is, I was just so overwhelmed by not knowing anything. Maybe it pushed me to work harder, because I was like, oh God, I've got to learn so much just to get to the same level as in terms of knowledge base of the boys. So I kind of just worked my arse off, really, to just kind of learn everything. I didn't have the podcasts and the Pro Tools experts and all that at the time. None of those blogs. They didn't have all those blogs when and articles and stuff when I was. They might have, but they weren't as prevalent in the industry. So I had to learn everything on the job, and then just work there and work my way up there before leaving.
That's fantastic.
So you've got a lovely new studio.
I do. How
did that come about? And talk us a little bit through your setup.
When I went freelance, in 2014, I think, 2015, something like that. Originally, it was partly because my mum wasn't well, and I wanted to help my dad out a bit more, because Envy were great and I was changing shifts, and they were being brilliant, but there's only so many shifts you can swap with people and things like that. My dad was still full-time before he took some time off, but once I started looking into going freelance, I then thought, actually, do you know what, I can do drama, I can do computer games, I can do animation, I can do so many. I mean, obviously Envy do a bit of everything, but they mostly do factual and documentary. So I went freelance, and I was sort of working from home and doing my thing. But obviously, when I was living in flats, you've got neighbours, and you can't play things that loudly. And when you're dialogue editing, especially, when you're sound effects editing, you could make it really loud, but it's not like a necessity as much as I would say for dialogue or for mixing. And it was always that kind of, I don't want to, especially in the summer, you have the windows open and you don't want to be really annoying to all your neighbours. And also, yes, you can use headphones, but I wear glasses, and I find it quite uncomfortable to wear headphones for 8 hours a day, 8 to 12 hours a day personally.
I don't think it's necessarily good either, is it?
No, it's probably not very good as well. It's very concentrated. So, I mean, I've even now got one ear out, like it's very concentrated and insular. So, when my husband and I were looking to buy, I sort of said, I would love to look for somewhere. I know kind of beggars can't be choosers when you're buying a house, especially as our first house, but at the same time, if we can find somewhere that has a summer house or a garage or something that I can work in, and I can just put some soundproofing up, then that would be really useful. And then we found this house that had a garage at the bottom of the garden, and I was thinking, well, that's detached, that's brilliant, we can just convert that. And then looking into, because it was basically just bricks, I think it was concrete slabs all connected with metal, so actually it wasn't really to convert it, we would have to make it a lot smaller just to make it, I guess, habitable and then also soundproofed, and the space would have been really, really tiny, and that would not be a problem. I mean, I know lots of people have small home studios, but the problem I had was, we'd managed to find a house that somehow was a lot cheaper than the budget we had, but that was good because then I kept some money aside for this. But I thought, even basic just converting without building anything is really expensive. And so I need to justify spending the money, because otherwise it's just basically moving my spare room to the garden for X amount of £1,000. And it's quite a lot. It's a lot of money just to be in a different room and to not disturb or not wear headphones. Do you know what I mean? It kind of seemed a bit, I was kind of going, is it worth it spending all this money? So I said, well, why don't I do it so that I can add more services to what I currently can offer, or at least know that I can make more money because of it. So then I thought, well, my best friend does a lot of voiceovers. She does pretty much every time I turn the television on, I hear her voice. She does every single advert, promo, continuity, everything. I mean, she's brilliant, and she's a very busy voiceover artist, and she's constantly having people saying, can you do a reel with me, and blah, blah. So we talked about maybe doing voiceover reels, thinking we'd split the price between us. So obviously we wouldn't get a huge amount each, but with the USP of having her as a director, that would be quite good. And that's just a bit of extra cash on the side, because she has loads of people asking her for voiceover reels. My husband works at drama schools on the weekends, so he would have loads of graduates who might want a sort of first reel. So we thought, okay, well, we'll do that. But then, and so I said, well, if I'm going to do reels, we might as well offer voiceovers to sort of low budget telly or short films, whatever. But the issue I then had was, well, if I'm going to offer voiceovers, I'm going to have to make the building a bit higher spec in order to have it soundproofed and not hear. You don't want to have a voiceover and then have someone mowing the lawn I mean, obviously, I can still ask my neighbours not to mow the lawn if I have a voiceover, but it was just kind of, we're in a quiet area, but I was like, I'm going to have to spend more money. I'm going to have to make a higher spec building in order to offer these other services, basically. So it ended up being this small project of, I just want to not work in my spare room, to, okay, I'm making a high spec studio which needs to be soundproofed and not let any sound in. I'm not too bothered about the neighbours because I'm bottom of the garden in terms of sound going out. I'm at the bottom of the garden and there's just roads either side of me and there's an alley behind, so it's not too much about the noise getting out, and it's not like I'm mixing a drum kit or whatever, but it's more about the sound getting in for me. And I was looking online trying to find how to soundproof a studio. I mean, yes, there's so much online, but they are all so different. They all contradict each other as well. They're all like, don't do this, do this. And obviously I'm quite I'm quite active on Twitter and LinkedIn, and the amount of people who would comment on stuff telling me I'm wrong about stuff all the time, and it got me down a lot, especially I'd go, this is what I'm doing, and they'd be like, well, you shouldn't do it like that, and I'm like, okay. It was so difficult, and I didn't know where to start.
There's a metaphor for life.
I didn't know where to start because I wanted to cut costs I got a builder in rather than, I looked at those, you can get soundproof garden studios that you essentially pick one and build. But to get the size that I got here, the size that I actually ended up with, if I'd bought that essentially off the shelf, it would have been like 75 grand. And I've spent way less than that. So I was like, the cheapest thing for me would be to get a normal builder in rather than a sound studio builder, or to buy one of those buildings, especially because I have a weird shape. This isn't a rectangle. It's
a great shape, actually.
Yeah, so I did that, but then they didn't know anything about sound stuff. So they were going, oh, maybe we could do this. I've looked on the internet, and it was really just us trying to figure out how to do this. And I was at the media production show when I was looking in, I was sort of speaking to builders, and I spoke to a guy called Ben Neems, who, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he runs Resurface, who sort of resell like mixing desks and stuff. But he also started a thing called Space Crate, and they've basically got these old what are they called? Ship container things. What are they called?
Shipping containers.
Shipping containers. Yeah. So they've made them into these portable ADR. I see these. I think they've only got one or two, but these portable ADR where they go and take them onto set and do that. So he was like, oh, well, when we did that, you should speak to a guy called Howard who runs Studio Wizard. He basically designs all the soundproofing and the acoustic treatment for sound studios. And I went, yeah, but how much is that going to cost me? I went, oh, well, not that much. And I was like, but in the grand scheme of things, how much is that going to cost me? Because obviously it's like, I've got the build, and then I wasn't using because it was a small project, the builder's like, we don't need an architect. So I was in my mind of not spending any money on that. And then obviously I was like, I'm going to have to spend money on the studio design. But I would say it was the best decision I ever made contacting Howard, because I gave him the measurements and what I needed and what I was expecting. And he drew me designs, and in terms of the shape, he kind of gave guides to the builders on how to do everything. He then obviously did all the acoustic treatment, even gave me a whole other separate thing of, if you don't want to buy the acoustic treatment, like the panels, this is how you make them, this is what you should make them out of. He was fantastic, and he was great. I could call him, I had a long conversation on the phone, and I could email him with any questions, and he was brilliant. And we didn't do everything exactly the same as his, just because, this is my first house, and I'm kind of thinking, okay, obviously I'm going to be here a while with the studio, but I might want to eventually sell, so I need to make it slightly more domesticated than the plans necessarily had. Just like, for example, the lights, I wanted spotlights, and that's not what he had suggested for sound. And I was like, I'm willing to make the compromise, because although it makes it less, I guess, good or less professional, at the same time my studio is still a much higher spec than most people's home studios, so I'm happy to make that compromise. So there was a lot of going through the studio build and going, this is what Howard wants, how much extra is that going to cost? Because obviously, like, in general, this ended up being a much bigger than my original budget. Obviously, it's like getting married all over again. And so there's a lot of compromises, but he was fantastic. He really was great, especially because, I've had so many issues where I'm just like, I don't know. I've had so many stressful days going, should I be spending this money? Especially where my career is at the moment. I am mixing a bit, but I'm not mixing a lot. So is it a waste of money getting such a high spec if I'm not doing lots of mixing? But then looking forward, where will I be in 5 years? It's like, I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years. Yeah. We also he helped us with the whole planning permission thing. We've built, you come into the studio and walk down some steps to get the right height. I think it's 2.5 meters or 3 meters or something. If your building is any higher than that in your garden, you have to apply for planning permission. Now that doesn't seem like very high, but as soon as you add any sort of soundproofing in the ceiling, it brings down the internal height. And my husband's 6'5", and then
your roof actually moves up.
Yeah, and so our ceiling, we can take some photos, but my ceiling is all designed by Howard in terms of for reflections, and I mean you'd have to ask him exactly what it does, but I know it's sorted out flutter echo, I think, potentially, and it's also the shapes not symmetrical, so that everything, so it's all designed like really so much physics gone into it. So it has been brilliant. It's been difficult. We've had lots of problems with waterproofing because apparently this area is very damp, and so I had to basically get a basement pump system put in, which was not anticipated. So the first original quote they gave me for that was 11 grand, and I just burst into tears because I was like, I won't be able to finish the studio if I have to spend 11 grand. And the guy who came to put the pump in said, I've done 2-story basements that have not had this much water, so at least I know it's not just the builders cutting corners, that they were like, this is not normal. So I've had a lot of fallbacks with that, which means I haven't managed to build or do things that I wanted to do, or buy the equipment that I wanted to buy. But in general, it's been great. And now that we've got a few more ceiling panels to put up. I keep forgetting I've got them to do. And I need to paint some stuff in the porch. So whether it's client ready is a whole other thing. But it's mostly there, and it's been great. It's been so nice coming to work, commuting to my back garden. It's been good, and it's nice. I can actually play things really loudly. I can play, I'm dialogue editing a series at the moment, and I can play it loudly, which is. It's good because you don't want to miss anything, any of the sort of small clicks and tiny little sounds that I've got to get rid of. I can play it all loudly in here, and it's good, and it just means that when I do any sort of mixing, I can just do it properly and hear hopefully what it might sound like in a proper studio, I guess. That's the intention.
That's a good point, I think. Sometimes, having had several home studios and having done various degrees of treating them and faffing about and this, that and the other, it never really feels like a proper studio. And I think this is, friends and family will come in and they'll be like, wow, look at all this gear.
Spaceship.
Wow, can you do this? Can you do that? God, wow. Yeah, spaceship. I get that a lot. Especially, I've actually got a semicircular desk that my middle brother built for me. It's got the desk in the middle and it all kind of spreads round, and everyone calls it the Starship Enterprise when they come in. But yeah, that you never feel like it's a proper studio.
Yeah.
There's always something. I don't know about you, I've always got stuff that I want to change. I mean, when we moved into where I am now, this was 4 years ago, and I had a job on. So we moved in on the Thursday. On the Saturday, I cleaned the room that is the studio, and then I just moved everything in it and set it up over that weekend, because come the next week, I had to be working. And I haven't actually done anything since. So at some point... when I've got the chance, this is all going to come out of here, and I will actually decorate and sort it out, and the window needs replacing and all the rest of it, the lovely stuff that you have to do in a home studio. But yeah, it never feels like a proper studio. There's always something that you've got to add or tinker with or change, or it would be, I think this is obviously on a side note, but gas, the whole sort of gear acquisition syndrome is terrible. Where you think that if you get this one piece of gear, that will be it, and then that will be sorted and you'll be happy and the setup will be perfect, and of course it never works like that.
I've rearranged my desk. I mean, I haven't got a lot of equipment, but I've rearranged my desk about 10 times just because I'm like, I don't know how it all fits. I mean, I've got a massive desk, it's like a 2-meter desk, but I was like, I don't know how to fit it all in. And partly because I want to do it, I want to have clients here, I want people to, although I can pre-mix for TV here, if I do low budget stuff, we don't need, for TV anyway, this should be final mix ready. So the studio. So when I go and do a film, I'll obviously need to go and final mix in a bigger room. But for TV, I should be able to have clients come here and review here if they want to. So I've had to make it look nicer than I maybe would have if it was just me working with, or my husband using the keyboard. Like we had to try to think about how it looks, and that there is always that essence of, well, if I get these speakers, it will look better. Or if I get, and you kind of think, no, I really wanted an S3, mixing thing, but I don't need it. Especially if I'm not mixing that much at the moment. I've got a little artist mix. I've got something that functions. I don't need the S3, even though it looks better. I don't need it right now. So.
Well, I was going to ask you to talk through your setup, but actually, if we take a photo afterwards, we can put that up on the social media. to show off your lovely shiny
Will
studio.
be the
It's really
the
nice.
first photo, because I've been not revealing the photos.
Ooh,
I've been
okay.
doing like photo, and if you notice, all my photos are like of half a wall and things like that. Partly because some magazines are interested in doing a feature on them. I don't know. I need to find out if and when that's going to happen. But you can definitely take some photos, and then I'll let you know whether.
World exclusive to our 2 listeners.
It's set up really because I don't have lots of analog gear or anything like that. I have my audio interface, which is a Focusrite Scarlett. What is it? 18i20, which I can have. I can do a couple of microphones into that and a couple of speakers out of it if I want to. I have an artist mix for when I want to actually mix some faders, which is useful. Actually, I think I got it. I think it was Euphonics before it became Avid, so it's really old. I got it second. Most of my stuff secondhand, I got an Avid dock for mixing, which I haven't used yet. So it's one of those things where it feels like, is that a waste of money? But I know that when I'm mixing, I'll find it really useful again. That I got as B stock. I think it was returned. So I've been very much like, although I'll spend tens of thousands of pounds in the studio, but I'm being really stingy with all my equipment, partly because I'm like, well, I'm not going to pay full price just because. If I can try to cut corners, the whole build, I was trying to make things cheaper. I did most of the painting and then got someone to just make it look nice at the end. Speaker wise, I'm not going to reveal that because I need to do my article.
Okay.
At the moment, I've just got the ones I was borrowing. So I've got some PSI A17s, which is what I was borrowing to do my test. But I need to write the article of which ones I chose.
Great.
So that'll come. I've got some really good speaker stands. Actually, I've forgotten the brand of them. They're quite hefty stands. They look a lot nicer, I think, than a lot of them, but they come with these iso acoustic stands on top of them, like that separately. If you bought them, I've seen them for about £100, but they just help. I'm not a physics major, I don't know these things, but it helps. Apparently, helps the sound.
Yeah, I use Genelex, and they've got they come with a stand that is one of these sort of acoustic decoupler.
Oh
yeah. I've got that behind me. Not just me. This ones I borrowed, so it's just randomly sitting behind me. Yeah, they're really good. So and then what else do I have? I have my ultra wide screen, 21:9 aspect ratio screen.
Oh,
which
wow.
Dan and I have been drooling over things like this.
Well, this one again, I got this really cheap on eBay. When I say really cheap, it was really expensive, but compared to some of them, I mean, the reason I got this originally was because I was like, oh well, I don't need. I liked the look of it, and I was like, I don't really need 2 screens. And I find when I have 2 screens, I have my plugins on one screen. That's fine, but the other screen I find is not big enough for if I'm mixing, especially. I like seeing what's coming up. If I've got everything scrolling, I like seeing what's coming up so I can get my fingers on the faders quickly. So I thought, well, I'll just get the wide screen and then I'll just do 2/3 of the screen will be my Pro Tools and the other side will be my plugins. And then actually working on it, I was having my Pro Tools the whole screen and overlapping with plugins, and it was just becoming a bit tricky. So actually, much to Phil's despair, I bought another screen. Again, it was one of the cheapest I could find that was actually had good reviews. They could have gone cheaper, but I got a little HP, I think it's 21-inch, just a normal screen, and that's basically for just my plugins. My plugins and things like that are on there just because it's just easier. So trying to cut costs by having one screen and then ending up buying a second screen, and the first one was quite expensive, so it actually didn't really end up being cheaper. I have an Axiom 25 for any sort of MIDI stuff. I don't really do that much MIDI, to be honest. Phil probably uses that more than I do, but I'm wanting to use it more because I went to an event recently where they talked about doing Foley footsteps with MIDI controllers, and I found that fascinating because obviously rather than just using a sound effect, it'd be nice to use Foley, but we can't all afford to record Foley footsteps. So I found that really interesting. So that's something that, although I haven't used the Axiom in a very long time.
Have you heard of a company called Krotos Audio?
Yes.
Because their plugins, I've not tried them yet, but their plugins have lots of these, again, being able to do it with MIDI and stuff. They can generate all sorts of weird and wonderful things, which obviously are designed for post, but I wondered how I'd be able to abuse them for musical.
You could definitely abuse them for musical things, surely more so. It's those kind of things that I want to explore, but again, so until I've got time off, I haven't really had time to just play with it. I've been working.
So Dan and I are making an album,
Very
and
excited.
the conversations we're having are about us learning about different parts of the production process and the different people's jobs in that process as well. So I was wondering how music features in your editing. How do you go about mixing that in? What do you consider when you're mixing music? What do you feel that composers should consider when they're composing for maybe some of the dramas that you're editing?
The main thing for a composer, I think, especially, would be communication with the director and the sound team when, before you start, in the sense that partly there's sort of, there's always sound design elements to composing, I find. Well, it depends on what kind of music you're doing, obviously, but there's often sound design elements. So there's obviously a conversation of, well, is that going to be, are we going to do this emotion in the sound, or are we going to do it in the music? So, and, from your side of it, it's, obviously I imagine you're always sort of establishing who's going to go for it. And as Dan was saying earlier, if you have an explosion, are you both going to be loud and crescendoing and stuff, or are they just going to completely clash and you're going to have to, sack off the music? So I think the communication early on between the teams, if possible. Obviously with TV, as an editor for me, I often will get pulled onto something, when it's already been in post-production and editing. So I won't have a lot of those conversations, but I know that, the supervising sound editor, music editor, or the post-production supervisor will have these conversations. When I'm doing documentaries and factual television, I would be expected to, I do sort of all the editing. I do the dialogue effects and I edit the music, and that's when they get, say, one of your tracks, and they'll cut it up to fit the picture and stuff. So I would do a lot of work with music then, in the sense of the amount of times they'd start the music on the scene change, and then they'd have like a big, say you have like a cymbal at the end or a drum or something at the end, and they want that on the scene change, but obviously timing wise it doesn't work. So there's always like, do I fudge an edit underneath something that's loud because I know it'll be quiet, or do I often they'll make it will be on a beat, but it will be on the third beat. You'll have like the next bar starting on the third beat rather than and although all the beats are in, it suddenly goes out of kilter. So there's a lot of that, and I personally, I don't know how good other people are, but I find when I'm doing that, I'm thinking, I'm good at this because of my musical background and the flute playing and the piano and whatever. So there's all of that goes into editing when we've already got the tracks composed and they've mixed it. And to be honest, you have music editors and high-end dramas and films who will do that as well. Sometimes you actually go, right, I actually have done it where I've made them in time and then actually slowed it down or sped it up ever so slightly. Not enough for you guys to notice, don't worry, but just literally just for so it's like a couple of frames, because you'd be surprised. Someone goes, it's only like 3 frames out. I was like, yeah, but you'd be so surprised if you have a big, it's like when Phil's doing stuff with our dance routines, if we do a big end and then his band's just a little bit late, it just looks a bit wrong. Even if it's 3 frames, not everyone noticed, but some people would. So documentaries and factual, I do a lot of that, and then when you're replacing the international versions. But for drama, I personally don't mix dramas, or at least not yet. I mix indie films, so I'll take that in consideration. But for the drama, when I'm editing dialogue, I don't usually listen to the music that much, but I do pay attention to where it is, especially for when I'm, say, marking up ADR. So if I'm listening to people's lines going, can we hear what they're saying? Does it need to be recorded? If I can see that the music's going to be really loud and if I solo their line's not got any weird sounds on it and it sounds fine, but they're really, really quiet, or like they're saying it under their voice, they're mumbling a lot. Yes, I might be able to hear them if there's no music, but if there's really loud music, you're going to have to push his dialogue up or her dialogue up. And if they're whispering or speaking softly and we're playing it really loudly, that will sound weird. So I will have to take into consideration what the music's doing before I start thinking, do we need to re-record this or ask for a different take and things like that. So with dialogue editing, although I don't listen to it that much, I am aware of it, and I will have a look and see where things are hitting and things like that. Technically some people sort of say, you can hide a bad dialogue edit underneath the music and things like that. But with what I found, even in lower budget things, not just drama, I find that you never know if a director decides to cut a piece of music. So if they cut a piece of music and you've gone, I'm not really going to edit that very well because it'll be hidden, and then suddenly it's not hidden, then I'm going to get a call from someone saying, you didn't really do a good job. Well, you probably won't get this. They'll just ignore it and not hire me again, probably. But when there's certain series that you've done before, like I've done Grand Design so many times that I know pretty much they're not going to suddenly get rid of music, Not that I would do it on that, but I think when you know a series and know a director, maybe you can do that. But I would say as a rule of thumb for editing to always think, yes, there's music, but maybe edit it as if there isn't.
Yeah.
It's kind of how I try to do it. And the same with sound effects. So with like, when you've not got a long time on factual television, they go, oh, don't worry about putting atmospheres, say internal atmosphere, background stuff, if there's music. And that's all very well and good. But if they suddenly cut that music and then someone stops talking and it's dead.
Yeah.
So I always say we'll cover everything with atmospheres regardless. And then for drama sound effects with the music, I pay attention a lot more to the music because I don't want to spend a long time putting in sound effects that are going to get completely swallowed up by the strings or get covered up by brass. Like, you know, if I'm doing a sort of sound designy effect, say like a whoosh, and I've done a really cool, I guess quite low frequency whoosh, and then you've got all these strings, you literally won't hear it. So either I will just use a high frequency whoosh or just use a sort of less airy stringy whoosh and something more substance, or I will always double them up, so I'll have a low and a high so that the mixer can either choose to use both or just one, or just push. You know, it's the music is very often for dramas composed for the picture. You know, they probably haven't chosen library music. It's probably been composed for that thing. So they are more likely to. They're not going to want to ask the composer to change it. They're going to want the sound effects to change because we come in after you guys, essentially. Well, at the same time, but ours will be put in. So I kind of try to pay attention to the instrumentation and sort of pitch and things like that. And also if you've got things like, if you've got any, I guess it's all the sound designy stuff, if you've got any sort of tinnitus or any of those sort of things where there's like a tone, any sort of tonal effect, yes, you don't necessarily have to make it in the same key, and sometimes it's really cheesy if it is the same key, but sometimes if it's so clashy and it's like a semitone out or something, it will sound horrendous. So although you don't necessarily have to make it the same key because that could be really cheesy, it needs to work with it, otherwise they'll just get rid of your sound effect and it'll be a waste of time.
That's interesting.
I would say probably a similar thing with if you've got lots of really clacky drums or like loads of like pizzicato strings or any sort of like staccato-y stuff. You know, you could spend loads of time putting in sound effects that just will get hidden in amongst those things. So it's a case of just being aware of what's happening in the music. Obviously, we'll be working with a temp, usually be working with the temp score, but hopefully it won't be that different to the final. I don't know what the stages are, but most of the time I've had the final stuff, it's either they've just recorded it with live instruments or they've just toned down the bass, or usually it's not that different. And then film, when you're mixing the music obviously then becomes really important because I'm mixing the music into it. So I do find it interesting because the composers obviously, I mean, I don't know, do you guys compose where you'll do dynamics according to the picture or to just according to...
Yeah, I tend to try and keep out of the way of dialogue as much as possible.
Yeah.
Just making and taking into account instrumentation, everything, you know, because there are certain instruments that will just, you know, if you're playing something and you're right in the middle range of the piano, it's roughly around where most people's voices are.
Yeah.
So it gets really in the way.
I tend to think of dialogue as a lead instrument.
Yeah.
So you can only focus on so many things at once, and if somebody's talking, that's the focus.
You don't want like an oboe solo.
So at most you're looking at a bed or some underscore where you're trying to highlight the most important thing on the screen, which at that point is the dialogue.
I've mixed 2 films recently here where the music was very important to both of them. One of them was a documentary about aid in mostly Africa, but I think just all over the world. So when we're in these different countries, they were trying to, the composer obviously had to do, one had like quite a lot of African drums, and one had when it went to India, it was like had some sitars and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So it was really important that we could hear that, otherwise it was a waste of their time. But then it was a good documentary, but it very, very much wasn't like an entertainment documentary. It was very, very much information. So there was a lot of dialogue. So there was that whole like clashing thing. I was trying to basically really over dramatize it in any gap possible because I couldn't push the music up as much as I really would have liked to, just because especially if you had someone who was a really soft speaker. Some of the older women had quite deep voices, but they haven't got that strength that men have in their low register, and so I was like, I can't really push too much up because you would just lose her. So I find mixing music and sound effects into anything I find really fun, probably because dialogue's quite hard to mix. I guess I don't know. I find dialogue really hard to mix, but especially with film though, for me, I can do so much more dynamic range on films than I can in television. That I love mixing music into films because I mean, I can probably show you. I haven't got any clips of it, but I just find it so, especially when it's a really, really good composition, because you can just really hear all the instruments, you know, and some instruments, until you're really loud, you can't hear them as much in the mix, and it's nice to hear, for me to hear everything. But when I'm mixing stuff, I'll have all the stems, but I definitely do a lot of mixing on them. I don't really, that's why I was asking you how much you guys do. I don't really keep them the same level, apart from maybe under dialogue, as you say, if they've done like an underscore or like soft strings, I'll keep it kind of roughly the same. And I would find with experienced composers, I've not had to sort of suddenly dip like drums or anything, so that's fine. But I do find that I'm going up and down a lot in scenes where there's not as much dialogue. And I love mixing, maybe because of the musician thing. I really love mixing the music in films. It's my favourite thing. Not so much television, because I find that really hard, because you've got to find that balance of entertain. They're not there to have this glorious score. They're there to watch a TV programme, like in terms of factual stuff. Yeah. But film is much more, they want to embrace the music.
What advice would you give to your younger self or someone wishing to start a career in the industry?
Someone wishing to start, I would say, do lots of work experience. Especially because these days, I mean, even in my generation, I kind of started 10 years ago and I was still very much an anomaly not having a degree. I was the beginning of the generation where everyone had a film degree. So there were people like me who didn't, I mean, I had some people who were 18 and had no degree, but most people had some sort of training, whereas I would say more these days have film, sound engineering, film production or whatever. But if you don't have work experience, you probably won't get looked at, even with the degree. Well, at least I know with some companies anyway. I don't know about the smaller companies. Because work experience, A, it shows you've got an interest. B, you can learn about the industry before you go into it and decide you don't like it. Because you do get people who start as runners and then quit because they just don't like, I mean, especially, you know, with our kind of thing, you guys must get it 8 to 12 hours a day minimum, maybe longer if you've got a deadline. And people, I'm not saying that that's good, and that's not, you know, now that I'm working from home, it's a lot better for me because I can manage my time a bit better. I can take the dog out for a walk or whatever. But it does help seeing the insight, and it shows that you're dedicated to working in the industry, because, you know, so many people want to work in film and telly, and I think, you know, they need the dedicated people, really, which is, you know, a shame when you don't earn very much money, but it's the way that it works really at the beginning. So lots of work experience. I would say I do kind of wish I'd done a degree in it, just from my own confidence side of things, I guess. Like, I felt very intimidated by all the boys who knew stuff. I guess maybe also I was younger and I was the only girl, so in the kind of machine room thing. But yes, we all had to learn the tape-op stuff because they didn't teach that at unis. But I knew that as soon as we got into studios, they would just go much. I didn't know how to do anything. They'd all done surround mixes and done all the produced songs and whatever. I would like to have done a degree in it. If you don't do a degree, I think these days with the podcasts like this, learning about the industry. So I go and do a lot of talks at universities. Not a lot. I do some talks at universities. And although I teach them about the physical job of stuff, like how to do stuff, it's more about how you do the job in the sense that what do you do first and what it's like working in the industry, and who, a bit like this kind of thing, who talks to who and what, you know, you can learn these. And I think those kind of things are important to learn. So listening to podcasts, doing a lot of reading. I mean, I share a lot of content on Twitter, which is how I think I got the majority of my following, was because I don't write that much. I'm trying to write more for Protos Expert, but, you know, I find that those articles, I wish I'd had them 10 years ago. So, you know, all the listicles of 10 things that you need, you know, whatever. But just in general, all the information that is out there is so useful that you need to just take advantage of it, I think, because there will be people who have read every single thing on the internet, and it's a hugely competitive industry, and everyone wants to do it, and everyone will undercut you to do it. So you need to have something that's going to stand you in a good position, and I think knowledge is the key.
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power, exactly.
We've touched on this before.
That's the thing, is that, you know, I don't necessarily, I was never one of those people who was like, you know, boys and their toys and playing with loads of sound designy things and getting loads of analog synths and doing all that. I've never really been like that, but perhaps if my introduction to industry was different, it may have been, whereas I always knew I wanted to do something in like the industry ish. I just didn't know what. Like I did work experience at Sony BMG with PR. Like I wanted to be in music or TV. I just didn't know which, like the entertainment industry, because my mum was a dancer and stuff. And I just didn't know what. Whereas I think if you came from this, loving sound and playing with sounds, that's all good. But I wouldn't feel the pressure that if you haven't done that, you won't get anywhere. Because I never did that. I never really played and did all my own thing at home. I'd learnt on the job. I'd practiced a bit at home, I guess. But I mean, I was at work. You're there for getting paid for 8 hours, but you're there for 12. As a runner, you want to get home and just. I personally was like, I mean, I might do a bit of reading if it was now, but I probably wouldn't play with a lot of things unless it was essential for that part of my job. Like I was trying to get into track laying, so I would maybe practice track laying, but I wouldn't practice something unless it was relevant. Yeah. I also would say that going, and this is the question I get a lot at universities, is obviously each their own, anyone can do what they want, but I would personally not go freelance directly out of uni. I would go into if you can, go into a company. Because you learn a lot from other departments. I find a bit like what you're doing, knowing what other people do helps you do your job a lot better.
Absolutely.
And communication within those departments and getting good relationships. When I got promoted, when I was in the machine room, I was head of machine. I got head of machine room, so I had a very good relationship with the post-production producers at Envy, because I was the person who had to oversee everything. So then when I got promoted, they knew me really well, and they would always be like, oh, we got a really good job, and they would give it to me because they trusted me and they knew that I worked hard. So that was always useful. And just in general, if you go freelance as a sound editor, someone who's, say, I don't know, if you're doing a drama, they're going to look for a sound editor. They're not going to go, they might say, okay, you're a graduate, so you'll be a bit cheaper, but they also want good quality. So you'll be against people like me. I'm against people who are more experienced than I am in drama. I do drama, but I haven't done as much drama as I have done factual stuff. And so I'm even feeling that competition in terms of not being the go-to person. So unless it's a low budget thing or they really like you and want to give you a chance, they're probably going to choose someone with more experience. And, I got meetings in these companies because of my CV. Most people ask me about Top Gear in my interviews, which is really funny because it wasn't necessarily the hardest job I've done, but it's one of the most well-known. One of the hardest jobs I've ever done, or the most proud I've ever done, was the British at Envy, which had loads of battle scenes, but no one's heard of that. So having a CV and IMDb got me in the door a lot of places which, students wouldn't have. So I would always say, if you can go into a company, I think that really, really is such a beneficial thing on many levels, not just getting the credits. And then I guess the choice of, do you go for a small company or a big company? Because small company, you might move up quicker. But then if you know you're going to go freelance, you might not have credits that people know. Whereas I moved up slower, but then I left with Top Gear, The Voice, David Attenborough and all these things, and had people they knew that I worked hard and worked professionally because I came from somewhere like Envy that is very well thought of in the industry. And it helped, my experience from Envy is invaluable. Just working in such a high quality place that's well respected, put me in a good position, and it gave me a very good work ethic that you might not get. I mean, my work ethic at home is I can't work like I do it when I go into companies. I'm trying to get better. I still get the work done, but I'm still here. I mean, I send emails at midnight. Everyone always comments on it because I'm like, oh, I haven't done 9 hours yet. I need to, and it's terrible. And I think the work ethic you get from a company, especially starting out, if you can get used to it, is better, I think, than going freelance, personally, straight away.
If I can just drop in with a very, very bad pun, it sounds like sound advice. Sorry.
It's a great pun. Not the first time I've heard that, I'm not going to lie. I'll pretend that it was. So.
Thank you. I'm nothing if not predictable.
Lucy, thank you ever so much for giving us your window into your world.
Sorry for the waffling. I talk a lot.
Oh, no.
I don't see human beings very often. That's probably why. I'm in my own little world, especially now working in the studio. So
it's funny. This is something we've spoken about. There's several themes that pop up a lot. One is diversification, which you've also touched on. Yeah. And the other one is that it's quite a solitary thing. Yeah, there's so a lot of being by yourself for long periods of time.
I have a note on Twitter. Well, it was a tweet. It's not a note, but it's in the note section, from a nice gentleman called Tom Strachan. And Tom is an RTS award-winning editor and Baltimore Ravens fan. I believe he must have worked with Steve Hughes from last week. last week's guest. And Tom says, definitely give this a listen. I've not worked with many people who have a better knowledge of film and TV score. Steve's a great director and a top bloke too. Well worth your time. That's really nice, Tom. Thank you very much. And we thoroughly agree. We got that from Steve.
Yeah, couldn't agree
His
more.
knowledge was, way better than mine anyway. I don't know about you, Dan.
Oh, yeah. Way better than most people, I think.
Great. Thank you, Tom.
And I believe that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
How do you find us? Makingasoundtrack.com will tell you all you need to know. Links to the podcast, social media links, and there's information about us too.
If you're enjoying the podcast, it would make our day if you could give us a positive rating or review. And if you enjoyed this episode, hit that share button and recommend it to someone else. See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. We'll see you next time.
Laters.
See you later, oscillator.
Oh, just no.